Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. This is our first show of the new year. We've had about a month we haven't recorded a new show, but we're back on track. We have a great guest for you tonight. It's Kristin Floor, who is an activist with freedomgrow.org, which is helping incarcerated marijuana prisoners get out of prison after lengthy, in some cases, life sentences. And she has quite a history herself. We'll go into detail with her about that in about 10 minutes or less. We have an interesting short hemp news segment for you tonight. So stay tuned as we bring on the infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight's from right here in Oregon, in Corvallis at Oregon State University. Cannabis compounds identified by Oregon State University research via a chemical screening technique invented at OSU show the ability to prevent the virus that causes COVID-19 from entering human cells by cannabis compounds. Findings of the study led by Richard Van Bremen, a researcher with Oregon State's Global Hemp Innovation Center, College of Pharmacy, and Linus Pauling Institute, was published this Monday, January 10th, in the Journal of Natural Products. Lab tests show that cannabigerolic acid and cannabidiolic acid prevented an infection of humans' epithelial cells by coronavirus spike protein and prevented entry of SARS-CoV-2 into cells. Van Bremen said, quote, "These compounds can be taken orally and have a long history of safe use in humans. They have the potential to prevent as well as treat infection by SARS-CoV-2, end quote. It's a great story, but right here in Oregon. And here's another story in Oregon. Adults here in Oregon can now purchase up to 2 ounces of cannabis flowers from licensed retailers under amended rules issued by the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Control Commission. Previously, just been 1 ounce. The updated purchasing rule, which increases the quantity of cannabis flower a customer could buy per transaction from one retailer, went from 1 to 2 ounces, and it took effect on January 1st. Of course, medical marijuana patients can purchase up to 18 ounces. Last year, lawmakers enacted legislation, Senate Bill 408, increasing the allowable amount of cannabis flowers that can be possessed by adults in public to 2 ounces. State law allows those aged 21 and older to legally possess even greater quantities within the privacy of your home. Other rules issued by state regulators permit expanded routes for certain delivery services and increase the THC content in certain edible adult use cannabis products. These latter changes do not take effect, however, until April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2022. Montana legislation permitting licensed retailers to sell marijuana products to those ages 21 and older also took effect on Saturday, January 1st. Under the new law, customers may purchase up to 1 ounce of marijuana per transaction, or the THC equivalent in another form of 800 milligrams of edibles, or 8 grams of concentrate. Cannabis products are subject to a 20% tax rate. Use of cannabis in public is punishable by a civil fine. Marijuana possession or use on federal parklands is subject to criminal penalties. Adults in Montana voted to regulate the retail marijuana marketplace so that these above transactions can be above ground and transparent, and so that consumers can have access to lab-tested, quality-controlled products. Such a system is certainly preferable to the status quo of marijuana prohibition, which is why no state to enact legalization has ever moved to repeal those policies. Montana voters initially passed a pair of initiatives legalizing the adult use marketplace in November 2020. Provisions permitting adults to possess and grow personal use quantities of cannabis without penalty took effect 1 year ago. 18 states and the District of Columbia have legalized adult use marijuana possession. In Colorado Democratic Governor Jared Polis issued over 1,300 pardons late last week, those convicted of past marijuana offenses. The governor's office action comes months after lawmakers passed legislation expanding the pool of those eligible to receive pardons for cannabis-related convictions. The marijuana pardons apply to state-level convictions for the possession of 2 ounces or less of marijuana as identified by Colorado's Bureau of Investigation. Governor Paulus stated in a press release, quote, adults can legally possess marijuana in Colorado just as they can beer or wine. It's unfair that 1,351 additional Coloradans had permanent blemishes on their record that interfered with employment, credit, and gun ownership. But today we fix that by pardoning their possession of small amounts of marijuana that occurred during the failed Prohibition era, end quote. Last year, Governor Paulus similarly granted pardons to nearly 3,000 people with marijuana possession convictions. Colorado's governor is not alone in his decision to issue marijuana-specific pardons. In recent months, the governors of Nevada, Illinois, and Washington have taken similar stances to grant an estimated 30,000 pardons to those with low-level marijuana convictions. Additionally, state regulators in a number of other states, including California, New Jersey, New York, and Virginia, have reviewed and sealed the records of over 2 million people with prior cannabis-related convictions. Colorado is one of more than a dozen states that explicitly permit those with marijuana-related crimes to have their records either sealed or expunged. Tens of thousands of Americans unduly carry the burden and stigmatization of a past conviction for behavior that's no longer considered to be a crime. Our sense of justice and our principles of fairness demand that officials continue to take action in order to right the past wrongs of marijuana criminalization. Other new laws took effect on January 1st in Louisiana. Beginning January 1st, qualified patients for the first time may purchase herbal cannabis formulations from licensed dispensaries. This past June, lawmakers repealed the state's long-standing ban on organic cannabis flowers. Under the new law, medical cannabis patients will be able to purchase up to 2.5 ounces of medical cannabis flowers from licensed providers. In California, healthcare facilities in 2022 must permit end-of-life patients the ability to consume certain cannabis products. Ryan's Law, which was signed in September, provides for, quote, a terminally ill patient's use of medical cannabis within a healthcare facility, end quote. The proposal prohibits patients from either inhaling or vaping herbal cannabis products and restricts the use of any form of cannabis in the emergency room. In Arkansas, state lawmakers passed a pair of bills in 2021 to expand patients' access to medical cannabis products. Senate Bill 654 permits non-resident patients to legally access medical cannabis in Arkansas for a period of up to 90 days. Senate Bill 703 amends the Telemedicine Act to allow telehealth certifications for patients seeking medical marijuana access in Arkansas. Both laws took effect on Saturday, January 1st. In Pennsylvania, a couple of stories to end our Hemp News segment tonight. Starting January 1st, certain employers in the city of Philadelphia will no longer be able to test applicants for marijuana as a condition of employment. Employees in certain safety-sensitive positions, such as police officers and those who supervise children or medical patients, will be exempt from the policy, as will those employees who are mandated to be drug tested under federal guidelines. The citywide ordinance is similar to those recently adopted in several other communities, including Atlanta, Baltimore, and Kansas City, limiting employers' ability to conduct suspicionless drug screens for past marijuana use. There's no evidence to support the claim that those who consume cannabis in the privacy of their own home, away from the job, pose a unique workforce safety threat or risk. The last story tonight's also from Pennsylvania. Police officers may not engage in warrantless searches of a vehicle based solely upon the smell of marijuana, according to a determination by Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The majority ruled that law enforcement cannot infer criminal activity from the odor of marijuana because medical cannabis can legally be possessed by authorized patients under state law. A growing number of states, including Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia, similarly limit police from conducting either warrantless searches or arrests based solely upon the odor of cannabis. This case is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Barr. That's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. We have a great interview with Kristin Floor coming up. I think you'll find it both emotional and informative. If you are a loved one, though, are looking for a doctor to help you get a medical marijuana permit anywhere in the United States, give us a call at 503-235-4606. Again, you can call our office at 503-235-4606. Here's our interview with Kristin Floor, and please work to restore hemp. Good night.
Well, I'd like to welcome Kristin Floor back on the show. Kristin, this is going to be the first time we've had you just interviewed on your own. Before, you've come in with a number of other ladies who've been working on getting prisoners, marijuana prisoners, out of jail. And how is that work going today?
Well, Paul, I met you about 9.5 years ago or so. I entered the cannabis community due to the fact that my father had died in federal custody, and my mom was also incarcerated. And when that happened, I was surprised that there was people other than my dad in prison. And I had started meeting so many cannabis prisoners that we all started fighting for. And over the years, you've seen us holding signs for them, advocating for their release. And I am pleased to announce that after about almost 10 years of working with this, with these people, I have seen a lot of people become free. A
Right.
lot. Compared.
God.
Yeah.
I just want to say I remember meeting your dad and your mom and a number of other people when I opened clinics in Montana. And so I had a clinic there in Missoula, but we saw patients across the state of Montana. I remember working with Tom Dobert and Chris Lindsay and your dad and other people on the emerging cannabis scene. And then the federal government decided to target your family. And it was just a horrible injustice, in my opinion, because they've been working to follow Montana's medical marijuana law very strictly. And in other jurisdictions, the feds hadn't come in to do enforcement, but the situation there in Montana was rapidly evolving at that time. And now we're talking like 2008, 2010, right in that period.
Yeah, it was 2011. Is the medical laws in Montana were just great. The medical marijuana laws there, and in the early part of 2011, the federal government raided 26 dispensaries all at once, literally while the legislature was voting to repeal that current state law as it existed. So we had two things in Montana going on at once. We had the federal government raiding, and they were voting to get rid of the state laws at the same time, unanimously. And so 26 different dispensaries were ruined at that point. The state laws were ruined that day. They still never recovered from those state laws. In fact, I just heard that they're recreational now. But at the same time, their medical has just been torn apart.
Yeah, January 1st, they started to allow recreational sales in Montana. But up until then, it was just medical. But the legislature continued to interfere in terms of what the law that the people had passed.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about the ordeal that your family had to endure.
Well, just after those raids, my dad had co-owned 5 medical marijuana dispensaries throughout the state. The name of the company was called Montana Cannabis. And his business partners were notorious, like you worked with them, for getting the laws passed. One of them was a medical marijuana attorney. My dad's business partner, Chris Williams, was a grower, a very good grower. My father was also a grower. And together, they followed these laws. And when it was all said and done, they don't allow state laws in federal court. So what happens when it comes to all this is, a lot of people went to prison, and this just didn't also happen in Montana. There's raids that year in California, Washington. Lance Glore is a victim of those raids, and they go on. The list goes on. But what had finally happened is they didn't allow state laws in federal court, and my dad was willing. He was ready. He was going to go to trial. He was going to fight. He was facing 144 mandatory minimum years because. Sometimes if you have guns and you have cannabis and they are in the same place, that enhances your sentencing, mandatory minimum sentencing that the judge has.
So in the locale where there are grizzly bears in the neighborhood, you want to have
Yeah, like my grandparents, my dad inherited some of those guns that ended up being against him in the long run. So he was facing 144 years. He was ready. He was like, nobody in this state's going to convict me. Of being guilty. So he thought he had that attitude, but he quickly started getting dementia. And so he started kind of losing his mind. And the judge would not let him go to trial. The judge said, no, you can't recall certain events. So they first forced my father to take a deal. But it's like, if you can't recall certain events, then how can you mentally competently take a deal, So my father and my mother got laundering money. She pled guilty to some laundering money charges, because when you take the money from, medical marijuana and you put it in your bank account, that becomes money laundering, because medical marijuana period, whether it's recreational or not, it is still to this day a Schedule I drug. So when the feds want to enforce that, that's what happened. So my father was sentenced to 5 years. My mother was sentenced to 2. And my dad, before he was sentenced, he was like super, super sick. Like he was basically dying before he was sentenced. I mean, they wouldn't even let him go after they sentenced him use his walker. Like that's how bad he was sick. He needed a walker. So he was sentenced. He was taken into federal custody, where he stood in prison for 4 months. And then for those 4 months, he was literally, in my opinion, tortured and neglected to death in the way that, like I said, he had dementia and he had osteoporosis. So when he rocked back and forth in the bed because of his mental health, he just, bam, ended up right on the ground. And he was a heavy man, so he would break bones instantly. When he passed away, he had 8 broken bones. That was not his cause of death. Throughout those 4 months, he also was screaming and crying on a daily basis for help to the nurses. He never got no help. He got told to quit faking it. Okay, and I just want to reiterate that the cause of his death was undiagnosed colon cancer. So he was mentally being abused by the nurses, accusing him of faking colon cancer, and never once took him to a hospital.
From the colon cancer.
Right. They didn't give him pain medicine.
I didn't realize that it was a colon cancer that actually had. I recall he was being transported at the time of his death, right?
Well, so while he was growing colon cancer for four of these months, and he was also having the osteoporosis, the dementia, breaking the bones. He was also having extreme blood sugar levels. They were going up and down crazy every day. So he'd disappear off to medical. No one would hear from him for days. He'd come out of medical and find out they weren't giving him his medicines. He also had a lot. He had like 10 different things, major things wrong with him. He had aneurysms in his heart. He had stents in his heart. He had all kinds of stuff going on. They weren't giving him his heart medicine. So 4 months into his federal sentence, after the torment, after the neglect, and I'm telling you, like, we're talking about kites were getting ignored. That's what you say when you want medicine. You or to see a doctor, you put in a kite. All those things were getting ignored. And other inmates were taking care of my dad because he couldn't walk anymore in prison. And when he could, it was just literally to get to the phone to call me to beg me to give him some help. And other inmates, not the nurses, but the other inmates were rubbing his feet. They were getting him, washing him, clothing him, doing what they could for him until he was transferred. He was transferred out of there 4 months into that. Now, during his federal transfer, he got to a holding facility in Las Vegas. And I'm going to remind you guys, this whole time for 4 months, after my mom was sentenced, like they made my dad self-surrender, but I had to go walk my mom into prison they took my dad right away. But my mom got to self-surrender, which means that I got to take her about a month and a half later and turn her into prison. So after my dad was there for a while, me and my mom had to hurry up because they took their house, their cars, everything. We had to hurry up and put all their stuff in storage, me and my mom together, and get what we could. And for this month and a half, while we were dealing with my sick father, and get back to Washington. So we got all of her stuff back here where I'm at, and then I had to go drop her off in prison, like she was my kid, and she was going to her first day of school, and here's both my parents off in prison, and I was a wreck. That's about the time you guys met. It's about time I showed up here.
Yeah, but first met, and I still recall the horror of what they did to your dad, and the horror of how he passed shackled to a bed there in Las Vegas with colon cancer and 8 broken bones and a heart condition, and they've got him shackled in it's like, it's not even a regular jail, it's a transportation.
It was a county jail. It was a holding cell. They were just holding him there. And the last time I talked to my dad, I got a phone call from him, a collect call from the Las Vegas jail, and he said, "Hey Chris, I made it out." He said, and I'm doing great. He said, "I think they like me here, and they're going to give me a wheelchair, but they're going to take me to medical to do some testing." He said, "So you probably won't hear from me for a couple of days." And I was relieved for a moment, because after all this time in that little private prison, I thought maybe he's going to get a doctor. He can maybe they'll see how emergent it is that they take him to an emergency room. So they kept him there for about 2 or 3 days, and I never heard from him. And I eventually I gotten a phone call from the U.S. Marshals one morning. About 2 or 3 days later, it was August 30th, actually, the morning of August 30th, 2012. They said, "Kristin, your dad's had 2 major heart attacks, and he's on life support." can you fly out to Vegas and take him off of the life support? So apparently when they were transporting him out of there, we don't know where he was headed. His heart condition acted up. And now, mind you, these 2 major heart attacks, they weren't even the cause of his death. The cause of his death was the undiagnosed colon cancer. But they weren't giving him his heart medicine either. So it caused these heart attacks. And so he went there, and I immediately, I talked to my mom. I was like, Mom, I got to Vegas. So, I immediately booked a ticket, and as fast as I could get to Vegas. My dad, this isn't your average dad. This was like your best friend kind of a dad. This is like your whole life. This is your parent,
Right.
So I get to Vegas, and I get up there, and I spent a couple hours with him, and I looked at him, he looked terrible. But as soon as I got to the hospital, it was so crazy because for all these months he was shackled, and, he's pretty much dead when I got there. But he waited for me to get there. You know how life works itself out.
Yeah.
Like my grandparents, they waited for my dad.
Yeah.
Grandma, she waited for my dad, was right there. And as soon as my dad got there, she passed in the hospital. And it's kind of what happened here. As soon as I got there, he felt me. And after all that torture and all that neglect and all that abuse, my dad came to life for a minute, and he started going on these convulsions. He felt my presence. Like, it was wild. And I just looked into his eyes, and his eyes were all messed up. And I stood there with him I was there for about an hour, 2 hours, just praying for him, talking to him, loving him. And my mom called. My mom called on the phone that night, and I was able to put the phone up to my dad's ear. That was the first time he'd heard my mom's voice in 4 months, because the wardens wouldn't even let each other write letters. So I was responsible for relaying their messages, and they had been married for 36 years. And so I had to tell them what each other was talking about. So when I was able to finally put that phone up to my dad's ear without him telling me to tell her something, he came back to life again and started shaking again.
Right.
It was amazing. He was
Communicate
still living, even though he was still dying,
the dying process.
Yeah, he was still living while he was dying. And we were guarded by guards, and then after that, the doctors told me, that he was not going to survive, that he had to be removed off the life support. So then I spent a little bit more time with him. I looked him in his eyes, and I said goodbye, and I watched him, go into the other world. And I just loved him for as much little time as I had left.
Right.
I walked away, and I just looked back, like, bye, Dad, love you.
Yeah.
They were ripping the covers off of him, and he was still chained his ankle. Mind you, he had all these broken bones, but they still chained his ankle to the gurney of the hospital bed. So he couldn't even die free. He died chained. And that really woke me up, because the next day I said, all these people smoking weed, and this is going. My dad was a caregiver. My dad was the first caregiver and the first patient in Montana.
I remember that.
Yeah, in fact, he helped get the laws passed out here in Washington.
Yeah.
This is what they do. So at that point, the Seattle Hemp Fest just welcomed me in their arms. November Coalition, Seattle Hemp Fest, and I had love, I had family, I had support. It was kind of like counseling all these years. All those people had just been there for me. I had a voice. I instantly became an activist, and instantly, I mean, I started finding about other cannabis prisoners who were there. In fact, my dad only spent 4 months there, but some of them have been there for decades and decades and decades.
Right.
So, I started volunteering for an amazing group called the Human Solution International. We started working on court support, just being there for people who are going to court and facing cannabis charges. I left the Human Solution a while back ago and started VAL, Voices of the Cannabis War. And I started that with a guy by the name of Eugene Fisher. And Mindy, Mindy, where we were going to just try to get their stories out. And Eugene Fisher had served 25 years of a life sentence already, and he'd gotten out. And so we started working to try to get some of his other friends free. And we started a couple projects. We started the DeLisi Project. We started the Thomas Landreth Project, the Tom Gears Project. Yeah.
He just got out.
Yeah, all four of those projects. I mean, I'm not saying that we've gotten him free, but all four of the projects that Eugene and I and Mindy started together, everybody was free.
You got a lot of community support. I know I've signed petitions at the Seattle Hemp Fest for a number of patients. I mean, prisoners in there, including for DeLisi. Were you able? He got out in Florida, right?
DeLisi I watched. So Richard DeLisi is also not just somebody I'm an activist for, but he's a prisoner that I got to know very well. I've been working with DeLisi for over 7 years, taking his phone calls on a regular basis, working with his kids. I'm very good friends with the DeLisi family altogether. And yes, he was released. He served all but 3 months of his time. He served 32 years in prison for cannabis down in South Bay, Florida. I literally had the privilege of watching him walk out of his metal gates with, I mean, they had, barbed wire and everything else. And I watched him walk out after 32 years of just keeping him in that little place right there. And I'd say that was the greatest thing since my dad died that I got to personally be a part of. It made me
I gotta thank you for your work.
Thank you.
My admiration for the work of your family. And, I was peripherally involved there in Montana. I opened up a clinic, I think, in 2008, and then started seeing patients regularly. There was another fellow who came to some of my clinics who really messed up the law, in my opinion, in Montana, and got a lot of bad publicity by setting up sham clinics, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Christ. He caused a lot of bad publicity all across the state, which I think really set the movement back there. But your family and the group you were working with were always at the forefront of setting up a viable, reputable system under Montana's laws.
Mm-hmm.
And I, working mainly in Oregon when it comes to growing marijuana, we never had a dispensary system in place. So I just was able to give away free cannabis. Very few people could afford to do that. I can't afford to do it today, but not much anyway. But so I'm sure I was targeted many times by the federal government. I had, as you know, been through a federal charge before. So
yes.
I was very afraid that they would come after me and my family and my kids. But because I could afford to just give it away for free and always turn down money when they tried to give it to me, I think I skirted around those federal informants that were trying to take us down here. But
I agree with you.
I know I'm one of the few successful jury nullification cases.
Yes.
That they tried to put me in prison for 10 years under federal law here in Oregon, and fortunately, jury would not go along with that. But so your mom, though, she had to serve out a sentence. Tell us about your mom.
So my mom, she ended up she served her whole 2 years. And since she's gotten out, they took her house, her car, everything. So since she's gotten out, she's came to live with me in Washington, and she's been with me ever since. And she's doing great. She just tats and she crochets things, and I take them with me to some of the events that I go to. But Paul, let's talk about that jury nullification real quick.
Sure.
And then I want to talk about the group I'm affiliated with now. But one thing that I've learned throughout the last 10 years is the importance of jury nullification. And Paul, you are such a perfect example of how the system can work if education is distributed amongst our jurors. Because, we have so many people serving life sentence. And I said at the beginning of the show, I've seen a lot of freedom, but we still have people serving life. I mean, we still have people going in.
A group based in Montana has been leading the charge for 30 years on jury nullification. And I had been involved in working with them and working with informing jurors as they're going into our county courthouse and federal courthouse before they ever came and arrested me. So I actually was an activist that then started growing marijuana to support the cause. And used that money to put marijuana legalization on the ballot here in Oregon in 1985 for a vote in 86. And then I went through that federal trial in the early 90s. But yeah,
So
I wrote an article about it that will tell everyone all the details. If they want to look it up, just go on Google and search for how FIJA, or the FIJA, how FIJA saved my life, and it'll pop right up.
And FIJA, their initials are Fully Informed Jury Association. And what's really important here is, number one, you found your freedom through jury nullification. We have so many people who are serving life sentences right now that didn't happen with. So what?
99% of people
99%.
don't go to trial.
Right.
You know, what they offered me was 5 years. They'll give me 5-year mandatory minimum, and if I go to trial, then they're going to put me in jail for 10 years instead. So, and if I had been found guilty, they were going to move to have me put in jail right there with no, delayed turn-in.
Right. So, well, what happens is, like, you had, how many of your jurors voted not guilty?
In the end, it was 10-2.
God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Someone who was in my jury about 3 or 4 years after that. I was with another attorney friend, Paul Loney, who's co-hosted this show and been a guest many times in the past. We were downtown and the guy came up and started talking to Paul. It's obvious he was another lawyer, but he looked over at me, and very few people know my real first name. My mom has always called me my middle name. This guy looked at me and goes, "You're Douglas Paul Stanford, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." I go, "How do you know?" And I was on your jury, so I actually found out what happened in the jury room.
Oh, cool.
He was like the secretary. He wasn't the foreman, but he was in law school at the time, because lawyers themselves can't be on juries, but law school students can.
Oh,
And so,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, once they're a lawyer, then they're an officer of the court, and they can't be on juries. But anyway, he told me, my court-appointed lawyer, Paul Peterson, who deserves infinite praise, he told me about 2 or 3 months before the trial, they're going to they have your books, all the books from your library that they took, which is about 25 books about cannabis. About half of them are autographed. And they say they're going to introduce those. So he said he went to the prosecutor and told the prosecutor, "My mom was a librarian, and I have this sacred feeling about books, and you shouldn't introduce these books." And he said the prosecutor told him he wouldn't. And it is an offsetting. He says, "Well, if he does, he's going to regret it." I didn't think much about that, and it didn't even occur to me till several months after the trial did I recall that memory. But
Wow.
anyway, so the prosecutor puts my books on, and one of the books was called "Marijuana: Your Legal Rights." It had a whole chapter about jury nullification.
Oh my God.
We got an opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses. And we didn't call any witnesses in my trial, by the way. We just cross-examined the prosecution's witness. And so he had told the cop, pick up that book, turn to page 229, I think, and read the chapter headline. And the cop just stuttered for about 2 minutes. And the judge says, read the chapter headline. He's told he would never say it, actually. And the chapter headline said, "Jurors can acquit defendants even if they think they're guilty." So
Wow. Yeah.
it was a chapter about jury nullification. And so finally my lawyer said it, and it came out, and the prosecutor jumps up, a guy named Jonathan Hobb, recently retired, I guess. But he jumps up and goes, objection, Your Honor. You can't say about jury nullification. You can't say that. And the judge says, no. This is your evidence. You introduced these books. You can't object to your own evidence. And so it stayed in, and ultimately it made the real difference in the end. After the jury was hung for 3 days, the judge said, "Let me decide this case, and I will find you not guilty of growing and just guilty of simple possession of 2 grams of marijuana."
Wow.
And so that was a plea bargain that I had offered from the start. They wouldn't go for it. And so that's what it was. In the end, I was found not guilty of growing and manufacturing, but just guilty of simple possession of 2 grams of marijuana. But anyway, the jury. I've talked to many people who have eventually, most people. It's a very high pressure thing to be put in that position, So I never could find any fault in someone taking the plea bargain offer.
Right.
But I stood up to it. It was quite an ordeal. It actually happened when my children were very, very young. And so I'm glad I was there.
You risked a lot, because when you go to trial, you're faced with, are you going to snitch? Are you going to take a deal? Are you going to go to trial? And when you're going to trial, you're facing, sometimes life, the mandatory minimum, whatever that case may be, depending on the particular case. And then if you go to trial, you've got to hope that one or two or more of these jurors say not guilty. Otherwise, you're going to get the mandatory minimum. So, like, what the most important lesson out of this is to know your jury rights.
The most important part.
Because if your jurors didn't know, you would have probably went to prison.
No,
but they got educated in the middle of the trial.
And I had worked with FIJA before this.
Yeah.
But the most important part of a trial is called voir dire, and it's the jury selection process. And really, that was the only time I was really active in my trial, was that person. No, get rid of that. And my lawyer was on board. He obviously prepared these arguments, and he argued that they shouldn't find me guilty of the manufacturing marijuana, but he argued they should find me guilty of simple possession of the 2 grams in my pocket. His argument that you should find me guilty of the lesser included charge of simple possession. Well, they wouldn't even find me guilty of that. So when I met this lawyer who was on the jury, he told me right from the start that they were 10-2 deadlocked to acquit me of growing marijuana. And they were deadlocked 10-2 to convict me of the simple possession of the 2 grams in my pocket. And he said there was an older lady and a younger lady who I think were both school teachers who wouldn't convict me of either one. And so they were afraid. In fact, I remember they sent a note back to the judge asking, if we find him guilty of the possession, is that just the possession of the marijuana in his pocket, or is that all the marijuana that? And the judge could not answer that at that point. He'd already given his instructions, so he says, I can't answer that question. But that question had obviously come from those two ladies. But I'll tell you, I had been through one trial before that for resisting arrest when the police beat me up. Teachers, you want school teachers on your jury because they know what bullies are like and they have to deal with it all the time. So I always like to pass that along. But that's my story. But your mom came out and you started working. Tell us about your current organization.
Well, I've been through different groups. I started working with the Human Solution, and then it was VOW. And then Stephanie Landau, I don't know if you guys know her, Freedom Grow. She had started Freedom Grow about the same. We had all been part of the Human Solution together, and we kind of all just dissipated a little bit and did some other things. Well, she had started Freedom Grow, and we had went to do VOW. Well, after Eugene died, which is about a year later, Eugene and I we did a radio show together, and Eugene was the one I told you served 25 years of a life sentence. And I'm going to get to more about him in a second, but we just, Stephanie and I, a few years back, probably 4 or 5 years ago or so, we just like this. We've been working together ever since. So freedomgrow.org is our website. We're a nonprofit 501c3. And what we've been doing in the past is commissary money, where we send the cannabis prisoners what they need. We have just introduced a new program called the WISH program, which is it's a really, really cool program where what we're doing is we're getting them books, magazines, commissary money. We're sending them what they want. And then we're also doing prison outreach. So let's say the cannabis prisoner wants to send his mom. In fact, I'll just give you an example. We have a man by the name of Aaron Pike. Eric's been in prison for over 20 years. I think it's like his 22nd, 23rd year or so. And one of the first wishes we granted was last year around Mother's Day. Aaron wanted to send his mom one yellow rose with baby's breath. He hadn't sent his mom given his mom anything in over 20 years because he'd been in prison for cannabis all this time. So we did it. He left a little message for his mom, and we found somebody to deliver it to his mom on Mother's Day. And we started doing that. And that was the first time, she got this, opened up the door, and there's a gift from her son after 20 years. And that what we're trying to do is be the bridge so that the prisoners, when they're locked away, they still feel like they mean something to their loved ones. Like they can still show love versus just be locked up and then tell them they love them. They can do things for them. So the program has been kind of, we've been doing test wishes this last year, and we've just recently been getting some funding. So it's looking like these programs are super taking off right now, and that our wish program is going to be funded. As far as the family outreach, we've also been, our cannabis prisoners are in prison, and that's a whole family member taken out of the family. And usually it's the father figure because most of our cannabis prisoners are men. And I'm going to tell you, we have about 176 people on our list right now. And so when you take that man out, and those kids don't have a dad, and that mom's working, busting their butts, we want to be able to help. Freedom Grow wants to be able to help in there. So we just raised from a company called Air Wellness. They're very popular on the other side of the country. They own multiple stores. They gave us $25,000. So this Christmas, we were able to give all of the kids that we know of, and we're still getting to know some of them. And we had a big old long list, but we sent more release forms out to get more of the kids' information. So every week we've been sending a round of gift cards, $100 gift cards to each of the kids that have a parent in prison for cannabis. And we're trying to continue that. We've gotten some promises to help with some other holidays. We're also getting promises to help with commissary, and there's a company called Lemonade out in Michigan, and they have 4 of our cannabis prisoners. They have QR codes on these milk cartons. The milk cartons are supposed to resemble like a missing person. And so you buy the Lemonade, you buy it, and it's like the plug, the caregiver. It's kind of educational type of a program that they're doing. So they're going to be in turn giving us a donation that we will use for, cannabis prison outreach. So I'm really excited. I'm the secretary of the board. I'm a board member. I'm the board secretary, so I get to do all the fun stuff.
Yeah, right. Everything up.
Because nobody else on the board knows how to do the computer stuff, but they know how to do other things. Like Stephanie and Randy, they're really good. Stephanie helps me a lot. Randy Lanier, he's our Stephanie's the president, and Randy Lanier is our vice president. And Randy Lanier, you guys should check him out. So everybody on our board, they've either had a family member in prison or they've been to prison themselves. So we've all been affected to it, and we're all volunteers. And Randy, he served 27 years of a life sentence. He is Eugene's co-defendant, the one I told you guys about that I had the radio show with. After Eugene died, Randy started working with us. In fact, and Randy's really good at raising money, so he's been out there trying to get us what we need so we could take care of these guys.
That's great. That's
great.
great.
And so Randy's got a really cool video.
I just got to say that your program is so wonderful to
Thank
reach
you.
out and get these newfound industries to give something back to the community, especially people who put their lives on the line to help medical marijuana patients, as your family has, or just to get cannabis out into the community. I remember back when marijuana was illegal, I went around with Jack Harry, and Jack always said that, we're saving the plant that's going to save the planet, so.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, it's cannabis has never killed anybody. It's completely erratic, but cannabis laws have. And unfortunately, your father is one of the most blatant examples of how cannabis prohibition literally killed your father. And I've always felt so much compassion towards you because of that. And I'm so happy to see you active in the community. Tell us more about Freedom Grow and how we can support it.
Well, so if you go to our website, it's freedomgrow.org. It's an amazing website. In fact, it's like we're so blessed because we're all volunteers. So we've went through a lot of stuff in the past with people taking our website, or we get an argument with this volunteer.
I remember that.
It's
It's like you
crazy.
start something good and everybody wants to take it from you. I've been through
It happened over and over these years, but
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
This is great. Like we've been really blessed with a lot of help, and we have an amazing website. So you can go there, you can sign some of our petitions we have for some of our cannabis prisoners. You could check out some of their blogs, like Edwin Rubis. He's working on his 24th year in prison. He's serving 40 years, and he writes blogs for us all the time, and they're just so touching and moving. And it's like his voice right from prison. And you can go to our website, you can read their blogs, you can see some of their stories. Not all their stories are up there, but some of them are. And there's also a donate button. You can donate, you can find out events, you can volunteer. It's a very interactive site that you can check out and then go from there. Like, we're always looking for sponsors. We're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for anything that you can do to like help us, get the word out.
Well, that's what we're trying to do here today. So freedomgrow.org.
Freedomgrow.org. Yeah.
We will definitely keep pushing that out there. And so tell us some more about some other recent projects you guys have had. I know you go ahead.
I will say one thing. We've been traveling a lot. I do want to mention some of the newfound freedom. And Paul, I'm going to get you a picture. I wanted to show it during our show here, but it's a picture of all of us over the years. I have a few pictures of us. When we go to the Seattle Hemp Fest, you, Paul, and me, all of our people, we like find each other and we hold these signs for our cannabis prisoners. And there's a couple signs, and we were all holding some signs. And I wanted to show almost everybody in those signs, except for one person, had been free. So, like activism works because what had happened is last January, we always send letters to the president asking him to let people out, and it just never works. Well, when we write these letters, we set an intention. And about 2 or 3 years ago, about 3 years ago at Seattle Hemp Fest, we wrote some individual letters on these for some specific prisoners. And over the years, those names became really super popular. And those same prisoners are the prisoners that Donald Trump let out, about 8 of them, last January on his way out the door. And all of them were basically serving life sentences. I will say that, Luke and Lance, medical cannabis patients, were supposed to be being released, but they weren't. So there's a thing there about the medical that they're not budging with. But the rest of them that were on that list were released. And so I just want to say, activism matters, holding signs matter, getting out there, getting their names out there matter. And Paul, I'm really proud to have stood by you these years and hold these signs with you and our friends, because they're free. Some of them are free now.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So are they going to have another Seattle Hemp Fest? Once this,
I thought I was going to ask you that. I would hope so. I mean, I'm waiting. It's a great place to be, but I know that they their store closed down.
It's a huge burden financially. I put on the Portland Hemp Stock Festival.
And thank you for having us there way back. We've been getting letters since then.
Yeah, it's a huge financial burden to put on and their event was several scales larger than ours, so it was, I know their budget approached up to $1 million per event. I know they got up over 800,000 for a while. And my clinics were presenting sponsors for a long time. We got up to giving them, I think the last couple of years, I know that we were giving them $50,000 a year, but that was just, a drop in the bucket to put on that event.
Right. Yeah, they I know they lost their store, and that's what helped pay for a lot of it. And then they used to have these parties, and people would pay their membership fees, and that helped pay for some of it. And I know they're not doing those things no more. So I'm not sure. I do know that they're still active. I just went on a Seattle Hemp Fest, not board member call, but volunteer call, where their core call with their core members, and they're still meeting. I don't know if they're planning for Hemp Fest, but they are doing prison outreach. I got them a list a couple months ago with our cannabis prisoners' names on it, and they're still together because they're still doing outreach. I don't know if it's Hemp Fest or not. I hope.
Yeah. Well, I hope it comes back. I know it's a big burden to be able to pull something like that together, but it certainly was, the largest American pro-cannabis event, and I was always proud to participate in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been for Freedom Grow. We've been trying to go to a lot of events. We've been in Florida a couple times. We've been in Oklahoma. We've been down to LA. We've been to North Carolina.
You
And
travel the Cannabis, right?
yeah, the Cannabis, that's Stacy's bus. So Stacy's one of our board members, and Stacy's. And we're talking about medical cannabis. Stacy's uncle Gary Shepard was shot down by the federal government in Kentucky, guarding, not guarding, but standing on his porch.
Yeah.
Over like I think it's 9 medical marijuana plants.
Right.
So that's Stacy's.
We had Stacy on about 6 months or so ago, talking about the Gary Shepard case. It was just a horrible travesty there in Kentucky.
Yeah, she's also on her board. I was just on her bus in North Carolina. She's a good friend of mine. She's part of Freedom Grow as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any upcoming events you're going to go to? Anything that's currently planned?
Yeah. So at the end, or on February 11th, 12th, 13th, and I come home 14th, we're going to be at the Secret Sesh down in LA. Have you heard of that one, Paul?
I've heard of it, but I'm not very familiar with it.
So, back in the day, it used to be a secret, and now that it's legal and everything, it's not quite a secret no more. But lately, their events have been super cool. They've been having they have these geodomes, and so you go in them, and it's 3D. And so they have these. There's 5 or about 5 altogether domes. There's 3 big ones and a couple small ones. But you walk in the domes, and they got these projector projecting the images on the top of the dome, so everything looks 3D. So you see pieces of bud coming at you, and they have this one where they have these yoga theme. They have different themes in different rooms, but it's all cannabis related and connected. So it's super cool. Yeah, it's kind of an artistic type of an event.
That sounds pretty nice. I know that's right around the time they're going to have the Emerald Cup there in LA. I might go to that. I think I being asked to speak at that one. So if they do, then I'll show up.
Yeah, we had a booth at the Emerald Cup up in Northern California a couple weeks ago. Yeah, a month ago. But yeah, I didn't know that they had one in LA. I think I heard about it, but I don't think I knew what day it is. Do you know what day?
I think it's in April. Might be around April 20th. We'll see.
Oh, okay. We're gonna be in Oklahoma for 420 at it's called the Chronic Palooza. Have you heard about Oklahoma lately?
Yes, I have. I'm really impressed. I was always afraid of going to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma was one of those states I would not visit because of their draconian marijuana laws. And then they passed this medical marijuana law that just boomed in the very first year, and they have a huge medical marijuana market there in Oklahoma now.
They do. In fact, we had a booth there at an event there, and it's just like Washington used to be. You remember how they used to have the market in Tacoma?
Yeah, farmers
it's like
market.
that. Like you just go, you go to this lounge and you just smoke in the open, and you can everything is just like it used to be, like the wild, wild west. But now it's all recreation. You know how it was before the recreation laws came? That's what Oklahoma reminds me of. And I really enjoy it over there. It's like the old days. It's cool. It's awesome. But it also scares me a little bit, because I remember those days we're in Montana and they,
the way the corporatization has come in. I had my business stolen by a group of Canadians using lawyers and money and lies and forgeries, and I think they bought off the local judges and have some evidence to that regard. But it wasn't just me though. They did that in every state, and they're trying to, corporatize the whole industry and take out the mom and pops, and that's just wrong in my book.
I agree. And I remember when they did that to you, I was upset. That's wrong.
Yeah,
That's still wrong. You're like a pioneer. You're a legend. How can somebody steal something that you paved the way for everybody? take what's
Right.
yours. Like, we all know that's wrong.
With forgeries and lawyers. They spent $2 million on lawyers, but then last year, the value of their company that they took on the Toronto Stock Exchange went up to over 800 million Canadian dollars. And that's over 500 million US dollars. I think I have about $4,000 worth of stock in that they gave me as an afterthought just to kind of insult me. But that since then, they've completely gotten out of medical marijuana and closed all of the medical marijuana offices they had or sold them to the local doctors. And they're just working under my trademark in
Wow.
regular medicine in Canada, apparently.
Wow.
So they just got out of medical marijuana, I think, in the fall. And so it's really quite bizarre. But life goes on. I'm still helping medical marijuana patients. So if anybody out there needs a referral for medical marijuana, they can call us at 503-235-4606. I got to throw that in there.
Yay!
And then look up Freedom Grow, freedomgrow.org. Is there any other contact outside of the website?
We all have Facebook. We have Instagram, Facebook. Me personally, you can go to my Facebook. It's Kristin, Kristin, and then my last name is Flor. And if you have any questions for me or want to know how you can help the cannabis prisoners, just find me. One of my board members too. You go to our website and see all of our stories are up there. We just want you to join us.
All right. Well, I definitely am on board. I mean, not on the board, but I'm on board with your guys. And definitely do everything I can to support it. And I really appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing? Kristin here, I think we're about out of time.
I just want to say, do what you can to get educated about our history. There's a movie out there right now. It's a Netflix called Need for Weed. And one of our board members, Randy Lanier, who served the 27 years of a life sentence, the documentary is based around his story. And he's one of our cannabis prisoners that we've supported while he was in prison, held signs for him. His co-defendant, Eugene, who they mentioned in the movie, was also I did a radio show with. And it's not just about him. It's about our history. It's about our drug laws. It's about our federal government and how they just really do not like the plant. And it's how it became war. It's very educational. I recommend everybody watch it, along with keep those people who have built this, Stacy's uncle, my dad, Eugene Fisher, who got people free, who helped import it back in the day. There was a time when we couldn't grow it and we had to get it here. And some of those people are still in prison. So my final thoughts are literally just free the cannabis prisoners. And I love you all.
All right. Thank you, Kristin. We've had Kristin Floor from freedomgrow.org as our guest. Go out there, look them up, support them. I am really impressed with your work, Kristin, and I appreciate the ordeal that brought you to this time, but I'm glad that you're carrying on the legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. We'll have to have you back on and talk more about Freedom Grow's work in the coming months and years.
Okay, I could talk about cannabis prisoners all day.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. And remember to help restore hemp.
Of course, restore hemp.